I have always held a deep belief in God. From the moment I was old enough to grasp the workings of the world, my mother instilled in me that faith was the cornerstone of everything. Without God, we are nothing, she'd often say. Miho, remember that. I clung to those words as I grew up. By my teenage years, it became clear to me that my life was meant to be devoted to His service. Becoming a priest wasn't merely a decision, it was a calling. At least, that's what I convinced myself. I spent years at the seminary, poring over scriptures, theology, and the doctrines of the church. I memorized prayers, performed rituals, and learned what it truly meant to guide God's flock. When the day of my ordination finally arrived, everything seemed to fall into place. I had found my purpose, my mission. For many years, I served in a small Mexican town where faith was interwoven with daily life. The people there placed their trust in me. They sought my counsel, guidance, and comfort. When life's burdens became too heavy, I baptized their children, officiated their weddings, and blessed their homes. Outwardly, I embodied all that a priest should be. Yet, deep within, a persistent unease gnawed at me. I kept these doubts to myself. How could I possibly share them? A priest is expected to be an unwavering beacon of faith. But in the quiet moments, when the church lay empty and the candles danced softly against the ancient stone walls, I could not shake the feeling, the doubt. I prayed every day, led Mass with earnest devotion, and upheld every tradition passed down through the ages. Still, there were times I questioned whether I truly understood God or was merely going through the motions. Was I really drawing people closer to Him, or was I simply preserving an institution? I tried to dismiss these thoughts, telling myself they were fleeting weaknesses. Yet, they never fully abandoned me. Then one evening everything changed. It began like any other night. The town had grown silent. Most had retreated home to their families. Having completed my final prayers, I sat alone in the church before the altar. The only sounds were the distant chirps of crickets and the soft murmur of wind slipping through the cracks of the old wooden doors. I found myself gazing up at the large crucifix above the altar, fixing my eyes on the sorrowful countenance of Jesus on the cross. What am I missing, I wondered? Why do I feel so distant from you? I closed my eyes and murmured a quiet prayer, seeking guidance, clarity, anything to dispel the emptiness inside me. And then it began. At first, it was a gentle pressure in my chest, barely noticeable yet unmistakable. I shifted in my seat, thinking I might have been lingering too long. But soon, the pressure intensified, surging like flames through my ribs. I gasped and clutched my chest. The pain shot down my arm, and suddenly it felt as though every bit of strength in my body was drained away. My vision blurred, the candlelight stretching into strange, distorted streaks. I tried to rise from the pew, but my legs refused to cooperate. My breathing grew shallow, and my head began to spin as the world tilted around me. The pounding of my heart filled my ears, drowning out all other sounds. I was dying. The realization hit me like a brick. My body was shutting down right there, in the very place I had devoted my life to serving, all alone, with no one to call for help. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the altar, as if touching it would somehow anchor me and keep me present. But my strength faded quickly. My knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the cold tile floor. My head struck the hard surface, though I barely registered the impact. All I could feel was the crushing weight in my chest and the burning in my lungs as I struggled for breath. I longed to speak, to utter a final prayer or a desperate cry for help. But no words came. The edges of my vision darkened, and my thoughts slowed to a fading echo. Then everything went still. No pain, no sound, just nothing. I lost all sense of time while floating in that emptiness. It could have been seconds, minutes, or even hours. Time ceased to exist in that void. Then, gradually, something shifted. A peculiar sensation washed over me, as if I were being lifted. Not in a physical sense, but in a way I had never experienced before. I became aware of the room again, yet not as I had known it. It was as if I was seeing it from a completely different angle. And that's when I saw myself, lying motionless on the floor, my own body lifeless beneath me. I was no longer within it. That was the moment I knew I was dead, the moment everything went black. I had expected that to be the end. My mind was empty and my body numb, as though all the weight, the pain and the clamor of life had vanished in an instant. But what came next was something I could never have imagined. At first I sensed a faint feeling, like being suspended in water, weightless and detached. Slowly, the darkness around me began to shift, giving way to something new. I no longer had a body, at least not in the way I had always understood it. Yet I could feel myself moving, rising. The sensation was odd, as if I were being drawn upward by an unseen force. I didn't resist. I wasn't even sure I could. And then I saw myself again. There I was, lying on the cold tile floor of the church, completely still. My body looked small and fragile, like a discarded shell. My arms lay limp at my sides and the faint glow of the candles flickered across my pale face. I could even see a small smear of blood on the ground where my head had struck the floor. It was surreal, seeing myself from that distance, yet I felt no fear. I should have been panicking, shouldn't I? But all I felt was an odd calm, as if the chaos of the world had been left far behind. I hovered there, watching the scene below, unable to move any closer or further away. Even the church around me seemed transformed. It wasn't merely the perspective, it was the very essence of the place. The warm, familiar sanctuary, where I had prayed, preached and served for so many years, now felt utterly alien. And then I saw it, a shadow. It lurked just beyond the reach of the flickering candlelight that danced between the pews. At first, I dismissed it as a mere trick of the light, but soon I realized it was drawing nearer, and it wasn't alone. More shadows began to materialize, emerging from the darkness like tendrils of smoke. They moved in an unnatural fashion, their forms twisting and swirling as they advanced. I couldn't discern any faces or features, only shifting silhouettes, but I could sense their presence. The air grew denser and colder, imbued with a weight that pressed down on me, despite my lack of a physical form. The serenity I had felt moments earlier vanished, replaced by an escalating dread. The shadows didn't speak in words, yet I heard them, a series of faint, chilling whispers like a distant wind bearing hidden secrets. I couldn't decipher their message, but the tone was enough to send a shiver down my spine. They were drawing me in, not in a physical grasp, but through an unseen force. A pull, like invisible hands tugging at the very core of my being, dragged me away from the altar's light and into the encroaching darkness. I fought against it, but it was akin to struggling against a relentless current. The harder I resisted, the stronger the pull became. Panic surged through me as I realized I couldn't halt their advance. Was this my fate? Was this where my journey would end? I recalled every sermon I'd preached, every warning I'd given about the realities of spiritual warfare. Yet, I had never truly comprehended it. Until now. The shadows were more than mere absence of light. They were alive, and they desired me. My mind screamed in silent desperation, yet I was mute. I had no voice, no physical form to express my fear. All I could do was witness the shadows closing in, their whispers intensifying into a low, ominous hum. Then, just as the darkness seemed poised to engulf me, something shifted. A light appeared. At first, it was but a faint spark in the distance. Gradually, it grew brighter and stronger. slicing through the shadows like a sharp blade. The darkness recoiled, and the shadows hissed and retreated as the light expanded. The oppressive force that had been pulling me down vanished in an instant, replaced by a warmth I had never before experienced. This light wasn't confined to the space around me. It filled me from within, permeating every part of my being. Overwhelming yet gentle, its radiance was pure and potent, embracing me softly. I couldn't tear my gaze away. I was irresistibly drawn toward it. This time, I didn't fight against it. As I inched closer, the murmurs of the shadows vanished entirely, replaced by a silence that seemed almost musical. It was serene and soothing, yet charged with an expectant energy, as if something extraordinary awaited just ahead. The nearer I came, the more I sensed it, a presence within the light. This light was not merely illumination for its own sake. It was vibrant, brimming with love and power, and it beckoned to me. For the first time since my body had departed, I felt neither lost nor afraid. All I experienced was an irresistible draw toward something far greater than myself. In that moment, I understood that this was no accident, no mere dream. I was being pulled toward something divine, something destined to transform me forever. The light continued to envelop me, surrounding me with a warmth and peace, unlike anything I had ever known. As I ventured deeper into its embrace, I became aware of a presence so overwhelming, so profound, that I instinctively knew I was nearing something beyond my comprehension. And then I saw him. At the heart of the light stood a figure, radiant yet distinct, as if he were both a part of the light and its very source. His features were unmistakable, yet they held depths that eluded my full understanding. His face exuded love and compassion, yet an undeniable power radiated from him, a quiet authority that rendered all else insignificant. I ceased moving, if one could even call it that. I simply existed in awe. "Javier," he said. Hearing my name spoken by him was unlike anything I had ever heard. It was not merely his voice. It was a summons, an intrinsic knowing, as if he was speaking directly into my soul. "Javier," he repeated, and this time I felt the weight of his words. No condemnation, no anger, just an undeniable truth. I was rendered speechless. What could I possibly say? My whole life I had spoken of Jesus, preached his teachings, urged others to follow him. And now, here I was, standing in his presence, utterly unprepared. He stepped closer, and the love emanating from him was almost overwhelming. It wasn't a love I had earned or deserved. It simply was, vast and unconditional. "You have served me," he said, his voice both gentle and resolute. "You have dedicated your life to my work. But Javier, do you truly know me?" His question struck me like a bolt of lightning. My mind raced, desperately searching for an answer. Of course I knew him, didn't I? I had devoted decades to studying scripture, leading mass, and teaching others about his life and sacrifice. Yet, standing there face to face with Jesus, I realized something dreadful. I hadn't truly known him. I thought I did, I managed to whisper, though my words felt feeble and hollow. Jesus regarded me with an expression that blended sorrow with hope, as if he already knew my answer but waited for me to discover it for myself. "You know about me," he said softly yet piercingly. "You know the stories, the rituals, the words, but have you ever truly known me? Have you sought the essence of my heart, or have you merely followed my rules?" The truth in his words sliced through me like a sharpened blade. I had spent my life ensnared by rituals, structure, and the traditions of the church, measuring my faith by my obedience to its dictates, by how meticulously I adhered to its guidelines. But had I ever truly pursued a relationship with him? Had I ever opened my heart to know him beyond the printed words? Tears gathered in my eyes as the weight of it all crashed over me. I recalled every sermon I'd delivered, every piece of advice I'd given, every time I urged others to trust in Jesus while I was too afraid to do the same. I don't know, I whispered, my voice trembling. I thought I was doing what you wanted. I believed I was serving you. Jesus reached out, placing his hand on my shoulder, and the warmth of his touch filled me with both comfort and conviction. You have done many good things, Javier, he said, but faith isn't merely about your actions. It's about who you are with me. It's about truly knowing me, loving me, and allowing that love to guide everything you do. I could no longer hold back the tears. They streamed down my face as I sank to my knees before him. I'm sorry, I said, my voice breaking. I thought I was enough. I thought I was doing enough. But now I see that I was missing the most important thing. Jesus knelt beside me, his face nearly touching mine, his eyes filled with nothing but love. It is not too late, Javier, he said. You can know me. You can still walk with me, not merely for my sake. His words were a lifeline, pulling me from the depths of despair I had sunk into. For the first time, I understood the difference between the faith I had practiced and the faith he was calling me to embrace. It wasn't about the rituals, the structure, or even the title I held as a priest. It was about him. Teach me, I pleaded through my tears, looking up at him. Teach me how to know you. Jesus smiled, and in that moment, the light around us seemed to shine even more brightly. This is only the beginning, Javier, he said, but there is so much more to see. With that, the world around us began to shift again, and I felt myself being drawn ever deeper into his presence. The light transformed, growing richer and deeper, as though layered with meanings I could not yet grasp. Jesus stood before me, his presence unwavering, and I sensed that he was about to reveal something essential, something that would change me forever. Javier, he said, his voice both gentle and firm, you have spent your life serving me, but there is a deeper truth you need to see. Before I could respond, the light shifted again, and suddenly I was no longer bathed in its warmth. Instead, I found myself watching scenes from my own life, as if peering through a window. They were more than mere memories. They were moments of my ministry, times when I believed I was doing God's work. Yet now, seeing them through his eyes, I noticed details I had never seen before. In one scene, I saw myself blessing a family's new home. The mother clutched her baby tightly, her eyes brimming with gratitude as I sprinkled holy water and prayed over them. At the time, I had felt proud of my role as their priest, convinced I was ushering God's presence into their lives. But now, as I watched, I realized I had rushed through that blessing, distracted by the next appointment on my schedule. I hadn't taken the time to truly listen to them, to understand their fears or hopes. I had performed the ritual without being fully present with them. Then the scene shifted, and I saw myself delivering a sermon in the church. The pews were full, and I spoke passionately about the importance of faith and obedience. I had delivered that sermon countless times, confident that I was inspiring my congregation to follow God. But as I watched, I began to notice faces in the crowd that I had overlooked before, faces marked by doubt, pain, and longing. They weren't there seeking rules or rituals. They were searching for something deeper, something genuine, and I had failed to see it. I had never met them where they truly were. Tears welled in my eyes as the scenes continued to unfold. Time and again, I saw moments where I had fixated on the church's traditions and outward displays of faith, all the while neglecting the profound needs of those I was meant to serve. It wasn't that the rituals were inherently wrong. They had their rightful place. But I had allowed them to become the focal point of my ministry instead of centering everything on Jesus. "Do you see now, Javier?" Jesus asked, his voice slicing through the heavy tide of my emotions. "Faith isn't measured by the acts you perform. It's defined by the love you embody. The rituals are meant to point you to me, yet too often they become the destination rather than the path." I could only nod in silence, unable to muster a response. The undeniable truth of his words struck me deeply. For so long I had believed that being a good priest meant adhering to the rules, leading ceremonies, and upholding the traditions of the church. But now I recognized just how shallow that understanding had been. Jesus went on, "The church is not merely an institution, Javier. It is my body. It is the people who seek me, who love me, and who love one another. It isn't built with stone or timber, but with hearts open to my grace." As he spoke, the scenes shifted once more. This time, I witnessed moments when I had genuinely embodied his love without even realizing it. I saw myself sitting beside an elderly woman who had just lost her husband, gently holding her hand as she wept. I saw myself administering the last rites to a young man in a hospital, surrounded by a family etched with sorrow. I saw myself helping a destitute farmer mend his roof after a storm, my hands blistered from the labor. "These are the moments when you truly knew me," Jesus said. "Not because of what you were doing, but because of how you were loving. These were the times your heart was in perfect alignment with mine." I was overwhelmed by a mingling of awe and shame, awed by the power of love to illuminate even the darkest times, and ashamed of how infrequently I had allowed that love to guide every action. For every genuine connection, there were countless others where I had prioritized the structure of my role over the essence of my mission. Jesus stepped closer, his eyes brimming with compassion. "Javier, I do not condemn you. I know your heart and I understand the burdens you have carried. But now you see the truth, and with that truth comes a choice." "A choice?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Yes," he replied. "You can continue as you have been, doing good, yet never fully knowing me. Or you can cast aside the traditions that have held you back and step into the fullness of my love. You can guide others to me, not through mere rituals, but by living a life that reflects my grace." The weight of his words settled upon me, and I understood there was no turning back. I couldn't unsee what he had shown me. I couldn't unlearn this truth. For so long, I had thought my duty as a priest was to preserve the church, but now I realized it was about something far greater, leading people to Jesus, helping them know him, as I was beginning to know him now. "I want to choose you," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "I want to know you deeply, to live for you." Jesus smiled, and the light surrounding him seemed to shine even more brilliantly. "Then follow me, Javier, and trust that I will guide you every step of the way." As he spoke, a warmth filled my chest, a profound peace and purpose I had never experienced before. The doubts, fears, and questions that had long tormented me began to ebb away. They didn't vanish entirely, but they no longer held sway over me. This marked the beginning of something new, something genuine. The light around us shifted once more, and I sensed that my journey was far from over. There was still much to see, much to understand. Yet, for the first time in my life, I was unafraid. I was ready. As the radiant light settled around me, I stood motionless, overwhelmed by all that I had just witnessed. The weight of my life, my choices, my faith, my doubts, pressed upon me. Yet, alongside that burden, a clear sense of clarity emerged. At last, I understood what had been missing. and my heart yearned to cling to this truth forever. Jesus stepped closer, his gaze filled with both love and determination. I could feel that something momentous was about to occur, a turning point that would forever alter the course of my life. "Javier," he said, his voice steady yet gentle, "what you have seen here is not meant solely for you. It is for them, for all who search, for all who are lost, and for those who have placed their faith in empty things." I nodded, at a loss for words. My mind swirled with questions. How could I, someone who had spent years fixated on rituals and traditions, lead others to something more profound? How could I possibly live up to the truth you have revealed to me? It was as though Jesus anticipated my thoughts. "You are not called to be perfect," he said. "You are called to be faithful. It is not your strength that will carry this mission. It is mine." He lifted his hand, and in an instant, the light around us shifted once more. Suddenly, I was no longer standing in that serene, radiant space. Instead, I found myself gazing upon our world from above, not viewing physical landscapes or nations, but witnessing hearts, lives, and souls. I saw people everywhere, immersed in their daily routines, their faces marked by a quiet despair. Some were weighed down by poverty, others by isolation or loss. Many, though surrounded by the comforts of life, felt an emptiness inside. The specifics varied, but the essence was the same: a deep yearning for something more, something real. I saw churches, some teeming with people, others nearly barren. In many, the focus lay on rituals, on recited words, sung hymns, and upheld traditions. Yet I sensed the absence of genuine connection. They were like hollow shells, beautiful outwardly, but devoid of the substance that imbues true meaning. And then I saw something else. I saw moments of sincere faith scattered like tiny beacons amid the darkness. A mother praying over her child, a young man choosing forgiveness over anger, a stranger extending kindness to someone in need. These moments were simple and often unnoticed by the world, yet they possessed tremendous power. They encapsulated the essence of what Jesus had been teaching me, that faith is not about grand displays or rigid practices, but about love, humility, and genuine connection. As the vision continued, a deep sorrow welled within me for those lost in tradition, who believed that following the rules was enough, yet had never truly known the love of Jesus. I finally understood what he had meant when he said, "It is not too late." These people weren't beyond hope. They simply needed someone to guide them. "Do you see, Javier?" Jesus said, his voice cutting through the vision. "This is the world I came to save, and it is the world I am calling you to serve." Tears streamed down my face as I turned back to him. "But how?" I asked, my voice shaking. "How can I reach them? How can I help them see what I have seen?" Jesus smiled, his expression a blend of encouragement and conviction. "By living the truth you now know," he replied. "By showing them my love, instead of merely speaking of it, by walking with them, not standing above them, and by reminding them that their worth is not defined by their deeds, but by who they are, in me." His words took root in my heart like seeds planted in rich soil. I wasn't sure how I would fulfill this mission, but I knew I couldn't turn away from it. The world needed this message, this truth, and I was being entrusted to carry it. Before I could speak further, Jesus raised his hand and the light intensified, surrounding us both. I felt him place his hand on my chest, directly over my heart. The warmth was immediate, spreading through me like a wave of energy and peace. "Javier," he said, his tone both commanding and compassionate, "you are not alone. I will be with you in every step, every word, and every moment. Trust me, and I will guide you." As his hand rested on my chest, something within me shifted. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and I could see the world and my purpose more clearly than ever before. The doubts and fears that once held me back still lingered, but they no longer had the same power. They were overwhelmed by a profound sense of love, hope, and determination. Then the light around us began to change again, and I realized what was happening. My time in this radiant space was drawing to a close. I would soon have to return to my body, to my life, and to the mission Jesus had set before me. Before the light completely faded, he spoke one final time. "Remember, Javier, it is not about what you know. It is about who you know. And I have always known you." With those words, the light dimmed, and I felt myself being gently drawn back, as though I were being lowered into the world I had left behind. The comforting peace of his presence stayed with me, even as the weight of my physical body returned. I didn't know what awaited me on the other side, but one thing was certain. I was no longer the man I once was. I had been entrusted with a mission, and I knew I could not fail him. The first thing I noticed upon returning was the sound of voices. At first they were faint and muffled, as if coming from a great distance. Gradually, they grew clearer. Urgent voices speaking in quick, anxious tones. My chest felt heavy, my body weak, yet I was alive. I opened my eyes, squinting against the harsh fluorescent light overhead. It took me a moment to realize where I was. The hospital machines beeped softly around me, and I could feel the steady rhythm of something cool coursing through the IV in my arm. A nurse bent over me, relief lighting up her face as she saw me stir. "Padre," she murmured gently, "you're awake." The word awake felt weightier than ever before. I wasn't merely awake in the physical sense, I was spiritually alert in a way I'd never known. The memories of what had just transpired, the brilliant light, my encounter with Jesus, and the mission he entrusted to me, remained as vivid as the room I now inhabited. After the nurse stepped aside, a doctor entered and spoke quickly about my condition. He mentioned a heart attack, how they had nearly lost me, and that it was nothing short of a miracle that I had survived. I nodded along, not truly absorbing his words, for my mind was elsewhere, reliving every word Jesus had spoken to me. Once the doctor left, I found myself alone with my thoughts. Gazing up at the ceiling, I felt the crushing weight of it all settle upon me. I had died. I had stood before Jesus, and now I had been granted a second chance. Not only a second chance at life, but at living with true purpose. The following days passed in a blur. Friends from the parish visited, offering prayers and heartfelt support. They called me lucky, blessed even, to be alive. I smiled and expressed my gratitude, yet deep inside I knew this wasn't merely luck, it was something far greater. As soon as I felt strong enough, I began sharing my experience. I recounted to my fellow priests what had happened, what Jesus had revealed to me through the light, the visions, and the profound truth he had shared. I had come to realize that faith isn't about titles or traditions. It's about truly knowing him. Most of my colleagues listened politely, but many dismissed it quickly, attributing it to a dream or a stress-induced near-death experience. One priest, speaking in a gentle yet patronizing tone, even cautioned, "Don't read too much into it." But I couldn't simply ignore what I had experienced. In my heart, I knew it was real. And I wasn't alone in that conviction. A few parishioners and friends listened intently. Their eyes shone with wonder. "Padre," one woman said, her voice trembling, "do you think Jesus is really calling us to something different?" "Yes," I replied steadily. "He's calling us all, not to follow rituals blindly, but to truly know him, to live with love, humility, and compassion." That conversation marked the start of my new ministry. When I returned to the church, I realized things could never revert to the old ways. I couldn't simply lead mass, perform rituals, and go through the motions as before. My heart had transformed, and I knew my work had to mirror that change. I began to focus on the people, truly seeing them, listening to their struggles, and walking beside them on their own journeys of faith. I spent more time with the sick, the poor, and the lost, offering not just prayers, but tangible expressions of Christ's love. My sermons evolved too. No longer did I preach that obedience to the church was the ultimate goal. Instead, I spoke about Jesus, the relationship we could have with him, and how he longs to know us on a personal level. I encouraged everyone to seek him not merely through rituals, but with all their hearts. Some embraced this transformation, saying they felt closer to God than ever before, while others resisted, clinging to the traditions they'd known all their lives. And that was perfectly all right. I wasn't there to force change. I was there to guide, to love, and to embody the truth Jesus had shown me. It wasn't always easy. There were days when I felt crushed by skepticism and resistance, wondering if I was doing enough or if I was failing the mission Jesus had given me. In those moments, I recalled his words, "You are not alone. I will guide you." Those words became my anchor. As months passed, the changes within the parish became undeniable. People who had once felt detached from their faith began to rediscover new meaning in their relationship with God. Families grew closer, neighbors became more compassionate, and the church transformed from being just a building into a vibrant community. For me, a peace I had never known settled within. The doubts that once haunted me were replaced by a quiet confidence in Christ's love. I no longer measured my worth by my role as a priest or by the perfection of my rituals. I knew now that my value was found in him, and that was more than enough. One evening, as I sat in the empty church with candles flickering softly around me, I remembered the moment I collapsed that fateful night. The pain, the fear, the encroaching darkness. But even more, I recalled the overwhelming, radiant light of his presence. I realized that faith was never meant to be about titles or traditions. It was always about him, about knowing him, loving him, and allowing that love to transform every facet of our lives. Kneeling before the altar, I whispered a quiet prayer, not for myself, but for the people I had been called to serve. Lord, help me show them what you have shown me. Help me lead them to you. And in that moment, I felt his presence again, as real and powerful as it had been that night. I knew then that I was exactly where I was meant to be, doing precisely what I was called to do. The journey was far from over, but I was ready for whatever lay ahead.